Hi, my name is Tanya. Thank you for tuning in to Truth Be Told. Truth Be Told is your go-to source for uncovering the hidden facts behind some of the most misunderstood and lesser-known events. We dig deep to reveal the real stories, separating myths from reality and shining a light on the truths that often go unnoticed. Explore a world beyond the surface with Truth Be Told. Please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Today we are going to talk about what really caused the Chicago fire. Mrs. O'Leary and her cow didn't really start the fire, so who or what did? The story. One's a familiar one. Poor old Mrs. O'Leary left a kerosene lantern burning in her barn. A cow kicked the lantern over and the hay caught fire. The winds blew the flames, and they quickly spread through the wooden city, destroying most of downtown. The story that Mrs. O'Leary and her cow were the culprits spread around the city before the flames had even stopped smoldering. The cow was butchered and served up as oxtail soup at the Royal Palm, a posh downtown restaurant on Thanksgiving Day a month after the fire. The O'Learys had to go into hiding because they feared being lynched, but we now know that the story was total nonsense. While the fire did start in the O'Leary barn, the story that poor Mrs. O'Leary or her cow was responsible was invented by a reporter who thought it made for a colorful story. The local press, much of which was openly anti-Irish, picked up on the story and ran with it. The Tribune spoke of Mrs. O'Leary's typical Irish know-nothingness. Mrs. O'Leary was hounded on the anniversary of the fire for the rest of her life. Not surprisingly, she developed a lifelong hatred for reporters, and she never allowed herself to be photographed. It came from outer space. So, if it wasn't Mrs. O'Leary, what did cause the fire? Lots of stories have gone around over the years. More than one person has sheepishly admitted to family members in their old age chat they were the cause of the fire, whether by knocking burning ashes from a K-pipe into the hay or by sneaking into the barn to milk the cow on a dare, causing the irate cow to start kicking. They can't all have been telling the truth, though. One even stranger theory alleges that the fire was actually caused by a meteor that crashed down on the day of the fire in Peshtigo, Wisconsin. The meteor certainly caused major fires throughout Wisconsin, some of which were actually even bigger than the one that blazed in Chicago. No one is entirely sure whether the could possibly have traveled all the way south to Chicago and ended up localized in a barn southwest of the Loop, skipping everything west of Halsted and north of Taylor Street Process. Still, it seems an awfully funny coincidence that major fires would have broken out in two nearby areas with totally different causes on the same day. The mysterious theory of Big Jim Zero Leary. Mrs. O'Leary's son offered another explanation. Young James O'Leary grew up to be Big Jim O'Leary, a stockyard saloon keeper and gambling king. When a statement was made in the Tribune that the fire had been started by two young men trying to milk the cow in order to make whiskey punch, he was outraged. "The true cause of the fire has never been told," he said to a Tribune reporter in 1904. "But I'll speak out. That story about the cow kicking over the lamp was the monumental fake of the last century. I know what I'm talking about when I say that the fire was caused by spontaneous combustion." That's right. Spontaneous combustion. According to Big Jim, his father had just purchased some mysterious green hay, which, he said, had spontaneously combusted in the hayloft. Spontaneous combustion may sound crazy, but the National Ag Safety Database warns that storing hay that is wet and/or green can result in hay fires. While the true origin of the fire will probably never be definitively known, it's certainly a possibility. In the late 20th century, the city finally issued an apology to poor Mrs. O'Leary. Mrs. O'Leary's cow. Late last night, when we were all in bed, old Mother O'Leary left a lantern in the shed, and when the cow kicked it over, she winked her eye and said, "There'll be a hot time in the old town tonight." Fire, fire, fire 1. Now the truth about the Titanic. The Titanic's mystery ship. Could there have been a ship close to the Titanic when it sank? Several passengers and crew members aboard the Titanic reported seeing the lights of another ship on the horizon as the Titanic was foundering. Modern Titanic buffs feud over this mystery ship. What is known? The British freighter SS Californian was in the vicinity. The Titanic survivors reported seeing some sort of ship nearby. The Californian witnesses recall seeing white rockets at the right time to be the Titanic's distress signals. Solved? Not quite. Some doubt that the mystery ship was the Californian. Discrepancies in Titanic and Californian witnesses' stories raise reasonable doubt. It's hard to say whether the differences mean something or if they resulted from simple stress and distraction. By the time Californians steamed over to help, no survivors remained. The Californian's captain later came under cold scrutiny for the tardy response. The question of his culpability boils enthusiasts' blood to this day. In the most famous nautical disaster in history, on April 15, 1912, the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank in less than 3 hours. Of the 2,227 passengers and crew, only 705 survived. Of these, Britain's Milvina Dean, the youngest passenger on the ship at about 10 weeks old, was the last survivor. Dean lost her father in the catastrophe. In 2009, actors Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet made generous donations to a fund to cover Dean's mounting nursing home expenses. Dean passed away on May 31, 2009. Now the story of Robert Smalls. Sailing from slavery to freedom. In the early hours of a spring morning, Robert Smalls became a fugitive slave and a national hero. Robert Smalls was born into slavery in 1839 in Beaufort, South Carolina, where he lived until age 12, when he moved with his owner to Charleston. There, his owner allowed Smalls to hire himself out, with all but $1 of his wages going to the owner. When he turned 18, Smalls renegotiated with his owner to pay him $15 per month and keep the rest of what he earned. He married Hannah Jones, who was owned by a different slaveholder. The next year, Hannah gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. Robert quickly made arrangements to buy Hannah and Elizabeth from their owner for $800. He had saved money toward that purpose when the Civil War broke out. On the job, Smalls held several jobs prior to the war, and through them he accumulated a variety of skills. Many of these skills were related to sailing, and in 1861, Smalls was hired as a sailor on the Planter, a cotton steamer, for $16 a month. After the war began, the Planter came under control of the Confederate government. It served General Roswell Ripley, commander of the 2nd Military District of South Carolina. Smalls's superior recognized his skills. Although his status as a slave kept him from gaining an official title, for all intents and purposes, Smalls was made the Planter's pilot. An early morning excursion. With that position, Smalls was given details of the signals and passcodes necessary for a vessel to navigate the heavily fortified Charleston harbor. This information came in very handy in the early hours of May 13, 1862. The 23-year-old illiterate Smalls did something that astonished everybody. He commandeered the Planter. The day before, the ship had been loaded with armaments to transport to forts where they were needed. While the white Confederate crew was ashore, leaving 8 slaves aboard, Smalls took the ship and went to pick up their families. He then sailed toward the Union fleet blockading Charleston Harbor, giving the appropriate passcodes as he navigated past Confederate ships. Smalls had carefully watched and studied the Planter's captain, and this morning he wore the captain's hat and coat, mimicking his voice and movements as best he could to avoid suspicion from others in the Confederate fleet. As Smalls and his crew approached the nearest blockading ship, the USS Onward, they were aware that their Confederate steamer looked suspect. Smalls raised the white flag of surrender, and as the Planter drew near the Union vessel, the nattily dressed slave doffed his cap, shouting, "Good morning, sir. I have brought you some of the old United States guns, sir. A new life." For the capture of the planter, President Lincoln awarded Smalls and his associates $1,500 in prize money. The Union press made Smalls a hero, and newspapers across the North told of his bravery, citing his actions as an argument against racial stereotypes. In one New York Daily Tribune editorial, the author wrote, "Is he not also a man, and is he not fit for freedom, since he made such a hazardous dash to gain it? Perhaps blacks are inferior to whites, but they seem to possess good material for improvement. Few white men have a better record than Robert Smalls." In August 1862, Smalls and Mansfield French, a missionary, traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with the president. Their objective, to ask the Union Army to recruit 5,000 black soldiers to fight in the war. That request was granted, and black soldiers and all black units were enrolled in the military for the first time in U.S. history. Smalls remained active throughout the war. On April 7, 1863, he piloted the ironclad ship Keokuk during an attack on Fort Sumter. The ship was struck 19 times and sank the following morning. On December 1, 1863, Smalls became the first black captain of a U.S. vessel and was honored for his bravery under fire. Going home. After the war, Smalls entered the world of politics. Tutors had taught him to read and write, and he had always been regarded as well-spoken. In 1868, he contributed to drafting the South Carolina state constitution, and he went on to serve in the South Carolina House of Representatives and in the state Senate. In 1875, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, where he served 5 terms. The man who was once a Beaufort slave boy had become the most powerful black man in South Carolina. Smalls moved back to Beaufort, where he bought the very house in which he had been a slave. Smalls died on February 23, 1915. His house is now a National Historic Landmark. Once again, thank you for tuning in to Truth Be Told. Please like, share, and subscribe.